Dr. Jonathan Pierce had built his life around appearances. At 51, he stood at the head of one of the state's most powerful healthcare systems, a man whose name adorned hospital wings and scholarship plaques. He was the face the cameras adored, polished suit, rehearsed smile, every hair in place. To the public, he was a savior, the CEO who donated millions, who spoke at conferences about innovation and compassion, who shook hands with politicians and posed beside children in oncology wards. But behind the white coat, the cracks were invisible only to those who wanted to believe in the perfection. At home, Claire Pierce knew better. She had been married to Jonathan for 25 years, long enough to recognize the subtle ways love can erode. Their home, a sprawling colonial with pristine gardens, looked like stability itself. Yet the air inside felt cold. She saw it in his eyes when he looked through her instead of at her, in the way his phone became an extension of his hand, in how the night stretched longer with him at the office. Still, to the outside world, they were enviable. Dinner parties with colleagues painted them as the model couple. Jonathan, charming and articulate, Claire, graceful and supportive. They played their parts well, but late at night, when the guests had gone and the silence pressed in, Claire would lie awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint clatter of Jonathan typing emails in his office downstairs. Sometimes she would come to the doorway, hoping he'd look up, hoping he'd say, "Come sit with me." But he never did. "Jonathan," she said one night, her voice hesitant, breaking through the rhythm of his typing. "It's nearly midnight." He didn't glance up. "Just one more report, Claire. Go on without me." She lingered, the weight of years in her silence, then walked away, her bare feet whispering across the hardwood floors. Jonathan knew she was hurt. Of course he did. But he told himself this was temporary. That once the merger was complete, once the board approved his new initiative, once the next milestone was behind him, things would ease. There was always a once waiting to justify his absence. Yet in truth, he was terrified of stillness. Work filled the spaces where doubt tried to creep in, where the memory of his father's failings and his own fear of inadequacy threatened to surface. Perfection was not just an image he projected, it was a shield. And it came at a cost. Claire felt the cost most sharply. She moved through their home like a ghost some evenings, pouring wine into a single glass, curling up on the couch with a novel she barely read. The man she had married, the one who once surprised her with weekend trips and whispered about dreams in the dark, felt like a stranger now. She wondered if he even noticed her loneliness. She tried to bury it, reminding herself of the good, the security he provided, the admiration their friends voiced, the life of comfort others would envy. But envy did not warm an empty bed. At charity galas, she would watch him working the room with flawless ease, his hand firm on her back, his smile a perfect accessory. She played her part, smiling when the cameras clicked. Inside, though, she felt like a prop in a carefully curated performance. And Jonathan? He convinced himself that Claire was content enough, that her silence meant acceptance. What he did not see, or perhaps chose not to, was how distance was slowly hollowing their marriage from within. The picture they presented to the world was seamless, enviable. But beneath the gloss of success and philanthropy, shadows lingered. Theirs was a house of glass, flawless to the eye, fragile at the core, and it was only a matter of time before the first crack would spread. The days slipped into weeks, and Jonathan's life continued at its relentless pace. Meetings, conferences, endless phone calls. His schedule was a machine grinding on without pause. To the world, he was tireless. To Claire, he was vanishing. She noticed the little things first. His phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter, now stayed glued to his side even when he stepped into the shower. Late-night emails became the norm, the glow of his laptop spilling under the crack of his office door long after midnight. When she asked who he was corresponding with at such hours, his answers were vague. "Bored business," he would murmur without looking up. Things you wouldn't want to be bored with. But Claire was bored, with excuses, with distance, with the brittle facade they both upheld. At dinner one evening, the tension snapped. The table was set beautifully, as always, crystal glasses, the soft gleam of silverware, but the silence between them was unbearable. Claire pushed her food around her plate before finally setting her fork down. "Jonathan," she said quietly, When was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about work? He looked up, startled, as though she had spoken in another language. Claire, I'm under a lot of pressure right now. The board expects— I'm not asking about the board, she cut in, her voice trembling. I'm asking about us. Do we even exist anymore, Jonathan? He leaned back, arms folded, his expression hardening. Don't be dramatic. We have everything people dream of. A beautiful home, security, respect. Why must you always find something missing? Her breath caught, anger surging through her chest. Because what we're missing is you. I don't want a title or a charity gala. I want my husband back. For a moment, his face softened. Beneath the armor, a flicker of guilt flashed in his eyes. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by the polished arrogance he wore so well. Claire, he said firmly, you're imagining problems that aren't there. You know how demanding my position is. Can't you just trust that I'm doing this for us? She stared at him, her hands shaking slightly against the linen tablecloth. Trust, she whispered. That's a word you don't get to use so easily anymore. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting match. Jonathan picked up his glass, sipping his wine as though the matter was closed. Claire felt invisible, a shadow across the table from a man who no longer saw her. Later that night, she lay awake, listening once again to the clatter of keys from his office. Her resentment grew sharp, laced with sorrow. She wondered if she had become a relic in his life, present but unnecessary. Jonathan, alone at his desk, stared at the screen without really seeing it. Claire's words lingered, gnawing at him. He knew he was failing her, but he also knew he couldn't stop. The demands of his career weren't just about success. They were about control, about proving to the world and to himself that he was untouchable. Guilt pressed on him, but he buried it under work, under the safety of tasks and numbers and plans. Their home, once a sanctuary, had become a stage. In public, they played their roles flawlessly, smiling side by side. But in private, every glance felt strained, every touch rehearsed. The fractures between them deepened, invisible to others yet glaring to the two who lived inside them. Claire began to wonder what secrets Jonathan was hiding behind that ever-present phone, behind the locked expression he wore more often now. And Jonathan, though he would never admit it aloud, feared the day when his carefully constructed facade would shatter under her gaze. The glass walls of their marriage still gleamed from the outside. Jonathan had always prided himself on discipline. Boundaries, he believed, were what separated the strong from the weak. But discipline faltered when Samantha Reed entered his world. She was young, bright-eyed, and quick with solutions, a hospital administrator whose confidence belied her age. To colleagues, she was merely efficient, someone who smoothed Jonathan's days with her meticulous organization. But to Jonathan, she became a spark in the monotony of endless boardrooms and sterile corridors. It began innocently enough, an after-hours discussion about staffing issues that stretched into a late dinner. Samantha laughed at his stories in a way Claire hadn't in years, her admiration soft yet insistent. The admiration was intoxicating. Jonathan told himself it was harmless. He needed the company, the validation. Claire, he reasoned, wouldn't understand the pressures of his world. Samantha did. Samantha listened. The dinners became frequent. Wine glasses clinked under dim restaurant lights, and Jonathan found himself confessing more than he should. About the relentless pressure, about the loneliness even in a full house. She listened with a tilt of her head, her gaze steady, and then, with dangerous subtlety, her hand brushed his. He pulled back at first, startled by the surge of desire that coursed through him. But later, alone in his office, the memory lingered. The boundaries he had once lived by blurred. Claire noticed the change quickly. Jonathan's suit smelled faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. His explanations for late nights grew thinner, and the warmth between them thinned to a brittle veneer. She tried to confront him gently at first. "You've been different lately," she said one evening, her voice quiet as they sat in the living room, more distracted. "Like your mind is somewhere else." Jonathan gave a practiced smile, dismissive and smooth. "Claire, you're imagining things. I've told you, the board is relentless right now. Samantha is helping me keep things afloat. That's all." The mention of Samantha's name tightened something in Claire's chest. "Helping? Or replacing me?" He sighed, irritation bleeding into his tone. "You always jump to the worst conclusions." Do you want to undermine me over nothing? Her lips trembled, but she forced herself to steady. It doesn't feel like nothing, Jonathan. It feels like you're slipping away. His eyes hardened. You need to stop letting paranoia ruin what we have. If I worked with a man instead of Samantha, would you still be suspicious? The accusation lodged itself deep, leaving Claire silent. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that her unease was only in her mind. Yet the late nights, the hushed phone calls and the glow in his eyes when her name arose told her otherwise. Jonathan leaned back. The conversation closed in his mind. To him, Claire's suspicions were an inconvenience, another mess to manage. He convinced himself he was still in control, still balancing two lives with perfect precision. But beneath the polished facade, guilt clashed with desire. He told himself Samantha was only filling the void Claire had created, that he still loved his wife. Yet each time Samantha's laughter rang in his ears, the lie grew heavier. Claire, lying awake in the dark, stared at the ceiling with dread curling inside her. Her instincts screamed of betrayal, but every time she voiced them, Jonathan's calm denial made her question her sanity. She didn't yet know the truth, that Jonathan's carefully constructed world was already unraveling, and Samantha was no longer just a colleague. The shadows had shifted, and soon, the line between temptation and destruction would vanish entirely. The receipt lay crumpled in Claire's hand, the hotel logo glaring up at her like an accusation. She had found it by accident, tucked into the pocket of Jonathan's blazer when she went to drop it at the dry cleaner. The date was recent, the charges expensive, the kind of night reserved for indulgence. Not a man who swore he'd been in late meetings at the hospital. When Jonathan came home that evening, briefcase in hand, his expression cool and unreadable, Claire was waiting in the kitchen. The air smelled of lemon polish, but beneath it lingered the sharp tang of her unease. "Jonathan," she began, her voice tight. "What's this?" She slid the receipt across the counter. His eyes flicked down, then back up, faster than a heartbeat. "A client dinner," he said easily, shrugging off his coat. "You know how these things go." Her chest tightened. "At a hotel?" "Yes, Claire, at a hotel. Sometimes meetings run late. Sometimes we book a room. It's not unusual." His tone sharpened, the calm mask slipping just enough to cut. "Or are you keeping a ledger of all my expenses now?" The accusation hit her like a slap. She faltered. It doesn't make sense." Jonathan's voice softened suddenly, dangerously. "You're tired. You've been overthinking again. You know how much stress I'm under. And now you're questioning me? After everything I've given you?" The shift disoriented her, his coldness melting into a tender plea, only to freeze into steel again when she pushed. It was gaslight woven into love, confusion spun as care. That night, Claire lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while Jonathan slept soundly beside her, his breathing deep and even. She turned toward his untouched side of the bed, where sheets remained smooth on nights he claimed to be working late. The silence pressed against her ribs like a weight. Memories replayed in loops, his laugh at dinner parties, the warmth of his hand when they first married, the way he kissed her forehead absent-mindedly when distracted by his phone. Were those moments love, or rehearsed gestures to maintain the perfect facade? Days blurred into one another. She watched him move around the house, impeccable in pressed shirts and polished shoes, a man admired everywhere but here. At the hospital gala, he stood beneath chandeliers, his arm around her waist, smiling for photographs. To the world, they were flawless. But in the mirror that night, as Claire removed her makeup, she saw only exhaustion staring back. Dark circles, tightened lips, eyes that no longer sparkled. The next confrontation came a week later. Claire, braver this time, pressed him in the living room. "I need the truth, Jonathan. Are you seeing someone else?" He leaned back, arms crossed, his smile icy. "This again?" "Claire, I've devoted my life to this family. I've built everything we have. And instead of supporting me, you invent stories to make yourself the victim." Her voice cracked. "I'm not inventing anything. I see the signs. I feel it." Jonathan's tone dropped, low and deliberate. "Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe it's you. Maybe you're so insecure you can't handle being married to someone like me." Her throat tightened. The words lacerated, twisting her love into shame. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. He turned away, scrolling through his phone as if the conversation were beneath him. Claire stood frozen, her heart pounding, her hands trembling at her sides. She wanted to scream, to shatter the silence, but nothing came. That night, she sat in the dark kitchen, a mug of cold tea between her hands, staring at the reflection in the window. The woman who looked back was a stranger. Tired, brittle, caught in the cycle of suspicion and denial. She whispered to the empty room, "What's happening to us?" Upstairs, Jonathan slept as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Their marriage, once a sanctuary, had become a battlefield of silence and simmering rage. Every word was a weapon, every glance a challenge. Claire knew the truth was slipping closer, yet Jonathan's grip on her reality made her doubt her own mind. She touched the hotel receipt again, folded neatly, and Jonathan Pierce had built his empire on the principles of commitment and trust. Patients, investors, and colleagues saw him as a man of integrity, a leader who kept his word. Yet in his private life, those oaths were crumbling, replaced with promises whispered in the shadows, promises he couldn't keep. With Samantha, the affair was no longer a series of stolen evenings. It had become a second life. He found himself slipping away from his office under flimsy pretenses, lingering in her apartment, where the air smelled faintly of sandalwood and rebellion. In those moments, he convinced himself he could rewrite the rules. That passion was worth the deception. But Samantha was no longer satisfied with fragments of his time. One evening, as they shared takeout on her couch, she fixed her gaze on him with unyielding intensity. "Jonathan," she said, her voice steady but edged with impatience. "How much longer do you expect me to wait?" He set down his glass, feigning confusion. "Wait for what?" "For you to leave her. For you to make good on everything you've been promising me." A pulse of guilt flickered across his face, quickly masked by a practiced smile. "It's not that simple, Samantha. You know the optics? The board, the donors. Claire is part of that image." She leaned forward, frustration tightening her features. "So I'm just your secret? Your distraction while you play the perfect husband in public? I deserve more than this." Jonathan reached for her hand, his tone soothing, rehearsed. "You will have more. You have to trust me, just not yet." But Samantha's patience was thinning, and Jonathan felt the walls closing in. He was balancing Claire's growing suspicion, Samantha's demands, and the fragile glass image of his career, all while pretending he was still in control. At home, Claire felt the silence between them widening like a canyon. The dinners that once filled their kitchen with warmth were reduced to Jonathan eating alone at his desk, while she picked at her plate in the dining room. His phone buzzed constantly, never leaving his side. Late one evening, unable to bear the isolation, Claire confided in her oldest friend, Anna. Over tea, her voice trembled as she shared her fears. "He's not the same, Anna. He's distant, secretive. I feel like I'm losing him to something I can't see." Anna studied her, concern shadowing her expression. "Claire, I've seen this before. Men like Jonathan, powerful, admired, they live two lives. They give speeches about loyalty and service, but behind closed doors, they chase whatever feeds their ego." Claire's throat tightened. "Are you saying he's unfaithful?" "I'm saying you need to protect yourself. Don't let his charm make you doubt what you know in your gut. If he's hiding something, the truth will come out." Claire nodded, though the words pierced her like shards of glass. She wanted to believe Jonathan still loved her, but doubt was spreading, cold and corrosive. Back in his world, Jonathan juggled the duality with mounting strain. At board meetings, he smiled with effortless polish. At home, he brushed off Claire's questions with irritation. With Samantha, he spoke of futures he didn't dare imagine. Every lie he told weighed heavier, yet he clung to them, terrified of the fallout. He had broken his oath as a husband, as a leader, as a man who once swore integrity was his compass. And though the walls had not yet caved in, cracks had formed. Claire was watching more closely. Samantha was pressing harder. The image of perfection was beginning to splinter. Jonathan told himself he could still manage it all. But deep down, he sensed the inevitable. Lies like glass always shatter when pressed too hard. The house was dark when Claire returned from dinner with Anna. But Jonathan's phone lay buzzing on the kitchen counter, a detail too strange to ignore. He never left it unattended, never allowed it out of his sight. Her hand trembled as she picked it up, knowing she was crossing a line yet unable to stop herself. The screen glowed with Samantha's name. A string of messages scrolled before her eyes. Unapologetically intimate, reckless in their passion. Can't stop thinking about last night. Leave her, Jonathan. Stop hiding. I want to wake up with you. Not in secret anymore. Claire's stomach turned. Every suspicion she had buried, every doubt she had silenced, crystallized into undeniable truth. She dropped the phone on the counter as if it burned her, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the empty kitchen. She didn't weep. Instead, a cold, focused rage steadied her breathing. She sat in the living room, lights off, waiting. The clock ticked toward midnight when Jonathan finally walked in, loosening his tie, humming under his breath as though life was still neatly in his control. When the lamp snapped on, illuminating Claire's rigid figure, his steps faltered. "Claire," he began, voice soft, cautious. "You startled me." Her eyes, sharp and unblinking, cut through him. "Who is she, Jonathan?" He froze. "What are you talking about?" She held up the phone, the screen still glowing with damning words. "Don't insult me. Don't you dare. I've read everything." His facade cracked. The practiced calm he wore in boardrooms deserted him, replaced by silence that only confirmed her discovery. Claire's voice broke into a raw cry. "How long? How long have you been lying to me? While I sat here believing in us, you were building a second life behind my back." Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, pacing, his voice rising. "You don't understand. I never meant for it to happen. I'm trapped, Claire. Trapped between two worlds, two women. I can't breathe in this marriage, but I can't let it all fall apart either." The words sliced deeper than confession. Claire staggered to her feet, fury shaking her frame. "Trapped? You think you're the victim? You built this cage with your lies. You destroyed the man I thought I married." Their voices collided in the dim living room, shouts, accusations, each louder than the last. The walls seemed to close in, their once loving home turning into a suffocating chamber of betrayal. A photo of their wedding day, perched on the mantel, trembled from the vibrations of their rage. Claire hurled it to the ground, glass shattering across the floor. "Was any of it real?" she demanded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "The vows, the years, the future we planned. Was I just the backdrop for your perfect public life?" Jonathan's face hardened, arrogance rising to mask his shame. "Don't act like you're blameless. You've pulled away for years, Claire. Always questioning, always needing more. Samantha, she made me feel alive again. She believed in me." The cruelty of his words left Claire breathless, a mixture of heartbreak and humiliation choking her throat. She stared at him as if he were a stranger in her home. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the ragged sound of their breathing. Jonathan stood with fists clenched, torn between defiance and collapse. Claire sank into the arm of the couch, body trembling. Her entire world dismantled in a single midnight confrontation. In that fragile pause, neither knew what would come next: reconciliation, separation, or something darker. But both sensed the truth. The marriage they had once built was already gone, crushed beneath the weight of betrayal and rage, and the night was far from over. The house felt like a battlefield waiting for its final blow. The remnants of their midnight argument still lingered, shards of glass from the shattered photo frame scattered across the floor. The faint hum of the lamp that had been knocked sideways, the stale air heavy with unspoken hatred. Claire had retreated to the dining room, her hands trembling but her resolve sharp as steel. Jonathan stood across from her, pacing like a caged animal, his face flushed with anger and desperation. Every inch of his carefully constructed life, the empire, the image, the spotless reputation, now hung on the balance of what his wife chose to do next. "You think I'll stay silent after this?" Claire's voice cut through the tense air. "You've humiliated me, betrayed me, and now you expect me to pretend nothing happened. I won't be your shield anymore, Jonathan. Tomorrow, everyone will know who you really are." Her words hit harder than any physical blow. Jonathan froze, his mind spiraling. For years, he had been the man in control, the man who dictated outcomes, who silenced scandals before they surfaced. But now, here in his own home, Claire wielded the power to unravel everything. "You don't know what you're saying," he snapped, his tone a mixture of warning and plea. "If you destroy me, you destroy yourself too. Think about what that will do to you, your family, your name." You'll be nothing but the wife who brought down her husband. Claire's eyes blazed. I'd rather be nothing than live another day in your lie. The words echoed final and damning. Something inside Jonathan cracked. The calm, polished mask he had worn for decades shattered, leaving only raw panic and rage. His chest heaved as if he couldn't breathe, as though Claire's defiance had sucked all the air from the room. He reached for her arm, his grip rougher than he intended. Don't do this, he hissed. Claire yanked free. Don't touch me! Her scream tore through the house, sharp enough to rattle the walls. She stumbled backward, knocking a lamp to the floor with a crash. The bulb exploded in sparks, casting the room into jagged shadows. Jonathan lunged forward, desperate to silence her. His hand closed around her wrist, then her throat, as though by stopping her voice he could stop the collapse of his life. Claire clawed at him, her nails raking across his skin, her eyes wide with terror. Jonathan, stop! She choked out, her voice strained, but the fury in him was louder than her pleas. Glass shattered as they crashed into the table, the edge splintering beneath their weight. The sharp sting of wood and glass mixed with the rising panic in his chest. But Jonathan didn't let go. Her struggles weakened, her body twitching, then stilling beneath his grip. The sound of her final breath was a silence more horrifying than any scream. Jonathan staggered back, his hands trembling as he stared at Claire's motionless form on the floor. Her hair fanned out across the shards of broken glass. The once vibrant woman reduced to a still figure, the warmth already fading from her skin. The house went quiet, eerily, suffocatingly quiet. The kind of silence that swallowed sound, leaving only the pounding of his heart echoing in his ears. He collapsed into the chair, clutching his head, gasping as if he could undo what had just happened. What have I done? He whispered over and over, his voice breaking under the weight of the truth. The polished CEO, the admired philanthropist, the man in the white coat, gone in an instant. All that remained was a murderer staring at his ruined world. He looked at his blood-stained hands, at the fragments of their life scattered across the floor. There was no hiding this, no controlling the narrative, no salvaging the image. Everything was over. And in that suffocating silence, Jonathan Pierce realized he had not only killed his wife, he had killed the very illusion that had defined him. The night ended not with victory, but with blood on the floor. The night after Claire's death, Jonathan Pierce stood in the dim kitchen with the lights off, staring at the blood on the floor. His mind worked with the precision of a surgeon, yet the panic of a drowning man. He scrubbed surfaces, hid shards of glass, and dragged Claire's body into the garage before finally breaking down, gasping as though the act of breathing itself had betrayed him. By morning, his story was prepared. Claire had left, a woman overwhelmed by years of strain, tired of his long hours, tired of the coldness between them. He rehearsed the lines in front of the mirror, steadying his voice into one of grief, not guilt. But the neighbors had heard everything. The screams, the crash, the sound of glass shattering. A middle-aged couple across the street told officers they had considered calling the police, but hesitated, assuming it was just another argument. Their hesitation now became damning testimony. Detectives descended on the Pierce home within 48 hours. The blood Jonathan had missed beneath the baseboards, the smears along the carpet fibers, the fingerprints and patterns of struggle, all spoke louder than his carefully chosen words. Forensics told the story he tried to bury, and then came Samantha Reed. At first, she denied involvement, desperate to preserve her reputation at the hospital. But text messages painted her as Jonathan's confidant, his obsession. Detectives confronted her with his promises, words where Jonathan painted Claire as an obstacle, a woman whose absence would free them both. Samantha's face crumbled. Her ambition curdled into shame, her testimony solidifying the prosecution's case. Jonathan Pierce had motive, passion, and opportunity. The trial began 6 months later in a courtroom packed with reporters, former colleagues, and members of the community who had once hailed him as a hero. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but sketches filled the evening news. Jonathan, gaunt and pale, in a dark suit that no longer fit his frame. Samantha, shifting uncomfortably on the witness stand. Claire's family in the front row, clutching photographs of the woman they had lost. The prosecution painted Jonathan as a man of dual lives, the healer in public, the predator in private. They displayed the text exchanges with Samantha, the receipts from hidden dinners, the forensic photographs of blood spatter against the dining room wall. Piece by piece, his empire was dismantled before the jury. Claire's sister delivered the most searing testimony. Her voice broke as she described Claire's growing loneliness, her suspicions, her final phone call hours before her death. "I don't know how much longer I can live like this." The courtroom held its breath, the silence heavy with grief and rage. Jonathan's defense fought to the end. They painted him as a man under unbearable stress, a victim of passion rather than premeditation. They emphasized his contributions to healthcare, his philanthropy, the lives saved under his leadership. But even as they spoke, Jonathan sat hollow-eyed, no longer the commanding figure who once dictated entire boardrooms. When he finally took the stand, the mask cracked completely. He spoke of pressure, of fear, of losing everything he had built. His words wavered between justification and confession, but the jury saw through him. They saw not the man in the white coat, but the man who placed his hands around his wife's throat and squeezed until the silence swallowed her. The closing arguments drew the lines starkly. A man revered as a king in his field had murdered his queen to protect his illusion of power. Justice demanded the crown be stripped. The jury deliberated for only 7 hours. When they returned, the verdict was swift. Guilty of murder in the first degree. The words hung in the air like a bell tolling over a funeral. Claire's family collapsed into tears, clutching one another, their grief finally threaded with a fragile strand of justice. Samantha lowered her head, shame radiating from her like heat, her once bright future now forever shadowed. Jonathan sat motionless, his hands folded in front of him, his eyes blank. The polished CEO, the admired philanthropist, the man once celebrated for saving lives, now nothing more than a criminal stripped of dignity. His empire had not been destroyed by competitors or scandals, but by the secrets rotting within his own marriage. As the guards led him away, his gaze flickered to the gallery where his wife's photograph rested on her sister's lap. For the briefest moment, something human broke through his hollow stare. Regret, grief, or perhaps only the recognition of a life wasted. The gavel struck. The trial was over, and with it the fall of Jonathan Pierce, the man who once ruled hospitals and charities like a king, and done not by enemies in the world but by betrayal, obsession, and blood on the floor of his own home.